Where were the worship centers for the pagan gods Baal and Moloch? Those were in the cities and on the hills around Jerusalem. And what was their detestable practice? They sacrifice children. We have the scriptures, including the Old Testament, with its Torah that talk about these things. There was an evil crowd that had infiltrated Jerusalem and the Jewish culture. In fact, Asa, was a king in Jerusalem who was raised from a young child in the royal court. His mother was a queen and father a king. Upon his father's death, Asa became king and went on with that royal group of people, And what went on with that royal group of people? Well, a few generations earlier, King Solomon had taken on foreign wives, a lot of them. Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Even as the wisest man on earth, he allowed his wives to bring their foreign gods and evil worship practices with them to Jerusalem. And what was one of the items they contributed to Solomon's household? They brought their phallic symbols to honor Osiris, as well as Ishtar, Isis, Venus, Eostri, and whatever name you want to use for Isis, who is the god of 1,000 names. It's the same god with the story, only varying a bit from culture to culture, but involving this theme of the mother and the child relationship. This perverted ideal was that Eve would continue conceiving children by Cain after Adam's death in order to continue the human hybrid line. Why Cain instead of Satan from that point on? After the garden, the serpent was made to crawl in the dust with a changed body. And in parentheses it says, as well as altered DNA and no further ability to interbreed. This ties into a lot of the stuff that I was talking about in my videos from like years ago about the altering of DNA, the genetic manipulations, the Anunnaki coming down here doing genetic experiments, hybridizing, all this stuff. This ties right into all that. In this seed war, just as Cain was on his way to kill Adam, the satanic plan is to kill every human not commingled with the bloodline, with the blood of the serpent, and thereby inherit the earth with all of God's blessings. And by the way, for those wondering, if you possibly have tainted or commingled blood, the obvious answer is that most all of us at this point, is that all of us would at this point. That's why the Jewish line in the Old Testament was keeping track of every person all the way back to Adam. They knew exactly who begot who from millennia. They were tracking the pure bloodline from man's beginning through David to Christ. Why was that important? It's because Jesus was a direct descendant from Adam through Christ's mother Mary. And when Jesus died on the cross, that messianic message messianic message and contention is that his blood is able to save us from our sins, able to cleanse us from all sin. Well, what was that original sin? It began with the commingling of the human DNA with the serpent DNA. Go read the Book of Mormon. The Mormon book ties right into this. The Mormon Bible. And I did some videos on this before when I went to Salt Lake City, Utah, and I connected all the dots with the genes of Isis, Genesis, Genesee, the street name, and the pyramid located on the street named Genesee, where they preserve genetic material, and how in the very first Nephi in the Book of Mormon, It's talking about God sending Nephi over to this other tribe to basically steal the genealogy records and bring them back. And then I showed how in the mountains right by Salt Lake City, Utah, they have a giant vault with a genealogy record of the entire planet all the way back to the Anunnaki. And that vault is not available to the public, no tourism, no visitors. It's like impenetrable, cameras all over it. It's designed to withstand a nuclear holocaust. See, all this ties into the Mormon book. I mean, the Book of Mormon, the Bible, all the stuff, the ancient Sumerian, the genetic manipulations, the obsession with hybridizing and keeping track of DNA and genealogy. All of this ties in with all the stuff that I've been trying to tell people about for years on these YouTube channels. When Noah was saved on the ark, what was the point? The Bible says Noah was perfect at a time when all the earth was filled with violence. In order to save the children of Adam, so that God could continue to bless them as promised, God destroyed the whole earth except for Noah and his family. But was Noah a perfect person? No, he too had all sorts of mistakes. He was just another sinner. But how can the Bible say he was perfect? You have to read the rest of Genesis 6:9. Noah was perfect in his generations. He was a direct descendant of Adam and Eve without the commingled blood. But that doesn't mean the rest, who may have had some amount of Cain blood, are unredeemable. Because Christ was sacrificed on the cross, his blood is able to save us from all sin. That act cancels out our sin debt, including the Cain bloodline, which it neutralizes and removes. So humans born in that condition are still able to be saved from the consequences of that blood. Christ's sacrifice was a blood sacrifice, and like Noah, some out there in the world are still pure-blooded back to Adam, a high percent of whom are probably Jewish. But my point is this: corruption and evil on the planet are present everywhere today, including the major world religions like Catholicism and Judaism, as well as the Protestant church and every other religion and cult in the world. Evil is not exclusive to only some areas of our society. Earlier, I mentioned that the captain of the Titanic was Jesuit, and that the banker families are controlled by them. In fact, much of this present fight we're in is being manipulated by the Jesuits. Again, instead of a classic military invasion, it's been an infiltration. When we take a look at the majority of nation-state spy organizations around the world today, we can see that at their root, many come from the Jesuit order inside the Catholic Church and royal families. Jesuits have always been able to infiltrate these monarchies. Today, governments and their deep state controllers around the world are continuously coordinating their actions. England's MI5 and MI6, our FBI and CIA, the Israel Mossad, German intelligence, and all other intelligence agencies are coordinated behind the scenes in this type of Spectre operation, like the James Bond movie series of the same name. Their efforts working together worldwide control governments, politics, institutions, and us. Perhaps the greatest single crime of the last century was the sinking of the Titanic, which paved the way for the centralization of the American economy and tax system, eventually leading to a world marred by a series of economically motivated wars. Back then, most everyone thought it was an accident, but there was some who complained and blew the whistle, but there were some who complained and blew the whistle on that planned accident. Of course, they were poo-pooed because people's normalcy bias and the false news narrative of that day, like today, would not allow them to believe otherwise. Funny choice of words that Juan, savin uses in here. People felt that murder on the scale can't happen. So those with information to the contrary, or just skeptics were blown off as the conspiracy theorists of the day. Still, it was a planned massacre and carried out successfully as the greatest heist, gaining the labors and energy of the American people, along with the rest of the world who use US dollars, which has become the reserve currency of our planet. In these past few months, we've had the COVID-19 shutdown that some have complained about being too hard and long, and they haven't really understood why it's been happening. Well, you are watching an extremely important and epic reversal. We are in this flip or boomerang moment. It's a biblical Haman type point in time, like when the Jewish people were saved from a planned surprise destruction at Haman's hand. That evil guy ended up being executed on the same petard, in parentheses, device he had built as part of his attempt to genocide all Jews. Sound familiar? And that time is now celebrated each year by the Jewish people as Purim. You can find my telling of that important history online at some video sharing platforms. Just as the evil Haman ended up hoisted on his own petard, today, too, we have been flipping our situation. We're taking control of the way the country functions, as well as other corrupt systems out into the rest of the world, including the US dollar reserve monetary system. In the midst of this COVID-19 crisis and the riots, we are grabbing back the controls, retaking the helm of our nation as we shut out and close down these various players. For those who haven't seen the progress or didn't know what to look for, what was Dr. Fauci, and in parentheses, a longtime globalist and head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, what was Dr. Fauci doing around the president during all those COVID press conferences? Fauci is just another player on the other side who decided to flash his secret little hand signs, like the two fingers up from the satanic Baphomet and his Freemason hidden hand. Fauci gave his hand signals both in and out of the news conferences. What do you think was going on there? And it shows a picture right there of Dr. Fauci doing the hand signals. All right, let's continue. This coronavirus has been just another plot. It was a plan. What are these numbers that keep coming up, like 311 and 113? Dates they target to deliver parts of their plans? Tom Hanks announced he had the virus on 311, which is March 11th, 2020. What is the relevance? Numbers like 311, 113, and 33 are inside signals. They are secret handshakes for the bank job that they're pulling off. What were they planning for last year on 11/3, November 3rd, 2019? They were going to take out Seattle with a nuclear bomb while portraying it as having come from a North Korean submarine. That setup had been in play for decades. Fortunately, it was mixed at the beginning of the president's administration, or it was nixed at the beginning of the president's administration. We have had protection over this country that most people can't begin to comprehend. And what was the plan before that? You might remember February of last year, 2019, when those helicopters landed at night in the middle of Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. Our military operators rushed into the Guatemalan Culture Center in the successful effort to protect us by removing chemical, biological, and radiological weapons stored there to be used against the American people. They planned on kicking off this sort of widespread sickness and disease scheme last year. And what about their ortolan bird ceremony at the Golden Globes in January of last year, 2019? It was their ritual about the sacrifices of innocents because they had designs to pull off their pandemic that same year. However, while their plan A was getting kicked in the butt, we've also been curtailing the flow of drugs coming into our country from China. We're quickly gaining control of what drugs are able to make it into the U.S. We are systematically pushing back, disarming, and decapitating these globalists who have had it in for America, intending to take us down. Part of the strategy with that was the cause of this huge pandemic, or plandemic. With that tool, they mean to walk us into their chaos, allowing them to become our masters again. Like the Titanic, their desire is for us to sink to the bottom of the ocean, another Atlantis buried beneath the sea. And who would step in during the aftermath to fill the void with America gone? Who has been set up for it and would be available to lead the world? Well, it wouldn't have been China, and it's not Russia. It would be the greatest empire on the planet that is still to this day the competition we've been engaged with in battle after battle for the entirety of our existence as a nation. The bankers. It's these monarchist bloodlines from across Europe and based in the city of London, which is the city within a city known as the Square Mile. They have had it in for us from the beginning. And even now, who was it that orchestrated the phony dossier about the Russian hoax involving our president? It was another special delivery from the bankers, which they presented to us through their complicit bought-off media. And that information was wrapped in pretty packaging of endorsements from all the usual suspects, the quote-unquote noble Cambridge University and its quote-unquote esteemed foreign policy scholar Stephen Halper, the head of the British intelligence MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, our highest-ranked people in the CIA, including John Brennan and all those quote-unquote benevolent FBI leaders who innocently traveled to England to quote-unquote consult on that falsified and treasonous report instigated by, in parentheses, current and former British intelligence officers at MI6, along with Stephen Halper and Australian operative Alexander Downer. The advance of the dossier was then facilitated by the Democratic National Committee, Hillary Clinton's campaign for president, and the globalist law firm Perkins Coie, as well as being assisted in the U.S. Senate by Senator John McCain and his cohorts. All these puppets that have been put in the highest levels conspired to take out President Trump, even as early as when he was just candidate Trump. And the other threat he posed was as a businessman who is not in their club. They saw him as a threat from the very beginning, including the risk to their religious city, Washington, D.C. Do you know that it's not just a political party? Come on, man, it's their D.C. church that is just as religious as the Vatican. Washington, D.C. was set up as a Masonic religious site. You know, if you look at the layout of Washington, D.C., like from above ground, it's all just Masonic symbolism everywhere, all throughout it. That's why they don't teach symbolism in school, in public education, because if you learn symbolism, you decode all this stuff. I don't have time to flesh this out here, but for those seeking advanced knowledge, look at John Dee, who was the original James Bond and is currently recognized by this symbol made up of 2 balls and a cane, 007. His 4-3 DC symbolic riddles are his great secret, the mystery of the triangle and the square, but the triangle is actually correctly seen as a tetrahedron having 4 sides. As part of that shrine, where did he get the White House and how was it given that name? The White House was a plantation settled by the White family 50 years before being handed over to the American people as the new capital, the original capital, in what was then Washington City, was burned by the British in 1812. But the White's house at the center of their plantation, the White House, was not so named for its color. Instead, it refers to that wealthy family who were Jesuits. So, their religion was considered all throughout the construction, orientation, planning, and maneuvering. And that's why, and why did Washington, D.C. have to be placed in an area where they had to fill a swamp, a place that has become known as Foggy Bottom? For the Masons, this spot was exactly the right longitude and latitude for all of their spells, rituals, and wizardry to work well, including the Washington Monument as one great big timepiece. Where the shadow of the Washington Monument falls very often determines which agency of our federal government will have a news conference, press release of some other event set to occur at the exact moment desired. Or they will look for the right shadow cast by the moon across that whole area. DC is a giant timepiece laid out as part of their religion, an ongoing religious operation. Here is an example of their wizarding ways. You may remember Obama performing 2 oaths of office the first time he became president. The pretext was that he supposedly didn't say it correctly the first time, having used a wrong word. This gave them the opportunity to reset his oath in the White House with a well-crafted and innocent-looking scene that involved a certain portrait on the wall beside Obama, his hand on the Bible, Koran, or whatever, and an important window. You see, the painting is of the architect for Washington, D.C., and just outside that glass to Obama's left, within his field of vision, stands the Washington Monument. He was in view of and saying his vows to Osiris. Also, it was precisely 7:30 p.m. Why that time? It was the 9:30 hour on a 24-hour clock, and 9.5, 30 is half of 60, so you get the 0.5, is a power number that is code for the other physics. Obama was performing a ritual having religious timing and meaning. All of these things are rituals for them. 100 years after the forced sinking of the Titanic, on April 14th of 2012, 2 ships went out 2 different directions and did a ceremony over the Titanic with the pretext to pray, P-R-E-Y, over those victims. I would contend to you that it was a ritual. Why were there 2 ships, and why position them at a specific distance apart? It was because the depth of the ocean floor completed their ritualistic triangle within the 4 corners of the world, branding their triangle in a square over that massacre site. They often have these types of ceremonies to commemorate their events. Why do we have to hear about the Titanic over and over every kind of movie, documentary, and television show, over 40 productions now, to remind us? It's an orgy of relishing in their success. That crime scene holds the greatest villainy that almost no one ever realized, and it's right in plain sight. They're laughing at you. They take pleasure at mocking you. Who they see as too dumb to even realize what's being done in your face. You're just weak, helpless, and blurry-eyed sheep, there to take whatever abuse they are in the mood to subject you to, and then be laughed at for it. With all that said, even now, we have people caught in the media narrative that claims this president doesn't know what's going on. He's disconnected, and his advisors are all filling him full of bad advice. Well, some are. The saboteurs, some planted long ago, are still in there to push their bad advice. But there are still many others in the military intelligence who have also been diligently working on plans to wrest control from those desiring to be our masters. They are giving our president great advice. As an example, for the first time in over 100 years, we're bringing the power of money creation back under our own original constitutional authority. We are throwing off the shackles and shekels of their debt slavery, slaves no more, and will never give it back. Along with the president, we are in the greatest fight of our lifetime. And all of you readers have to understand these things and decide to shoulder up with us and to be part of the answers as we overcome and overwhelm the oppression of these lecherous, self-serving deviants. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll continue in the next upload.